My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you for pardon of my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. In today's Gospel, Jesus talks about prayer, and specifically about not losing heart, not losing faith in the fact that Jesus hears and answers our prayers. And the Gospel runs like this. Jesus told his disciples a parable about the need to pray continually and never lose heart. There was a judge in a certain town, he said, who had neither fear of God nor respect for man. In the same town there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, I want justice from you against my enemy. For a long time he refused, but at last he said to himself, maybe I have neither fear of God nor respect for man, but since she keeps pestering me, I must give this widow her just rights, or she will persist in coming and worry me to death. That's the beginning of the Gospel. But the important line there is the first line. Jesus told his disciples a parable about the need to pray continually and never lose heart. And you see what this is telling us. Jesus knows that prayer is tough. He knows that you and I sometimes, maybe very often, get discouraged. He knows you and he knows me better than we know ourselves, and we know how difficult we find, at least at times, we find it to pray. We see in the Gospel, throughout the Gospel, that no two prayers are the same. In other words, when people come to Jesus praying for certain things, asking for certain things, it's not the same in any two cases. They approach Jesus differently. They approach with different motives. Sometimes our Lord grants them what they wish. Sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes he grants it immediately. Sometimes slowly. Look at some examples. First of all, petitions that are not granted at all. The Pharisees who want a proof. They say to Jesus, give us a miracle to prove yourself. Even when Jesus is on the cross, they're still at it. Come down from the cross, they're saying to him, to work a miracle so that it would be a kind of spectacle. Herod wants the same thing, in fact, from Jesus in the Passion of our Lord, and our Lord does not grant those petitions. Very obviously, they are evil intentioned. They're not worth even listening, let alone granting. Then there's other petitions. For example, the Syrophoenician woman, this woman from the area which is now probably Syria, what was then Phoenicia, and she comes to Jesus and she is persisting in asking for the cure of her daughter. Now, it seems very harsh because Jesus ignores her for a long time, and yet she persists. And then she says something very clever. She says that line, if you remember, that even the little dogs in the house get the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And Jesus is very moved by her faith, and probably by her kind of cleverness as well. And he grants her the request that she's making. Think of the mother of James and John. And when she comes along and she asks for the top jobs for her boys, typical mother, and Jesus says, you do not know what you're asking for. So she really doesn't. She thinks she's just asking for her kind of top positions, but in fact, she really doesn't know. So they don't exactly get what they're looking for, at least not in that way. And then there's the petition of Our Lady in Cana. Our Lady comes, tells Jesus that there's no more wine, which implies that Jesus has to do something about it. Our Lord has never worked a miracle before that, any miracle before that. And initially he kind of appears to turn down Our Lady, turn down her request, but she just ignores his refusal, and our Lord is kind of forced to grant the miracle, and he does. Now we have to think of ourselves, you and me, in this 10 minutes of prayer, talking to Jesus, maybe with particular intentions, particular petitions also that we have in mind. we have to be really sure that Jesus is listening. Jesus may appear silent. He may appear not to grant us our request, but we have to have total faith. Jesus hears us and Jesus is listening. Last week we celebrated the feast of St. Teresa of Avila, a wonderful saint, a great saint in the history of the church, and a saint who had many visions of Jesus, kind of very ordinary things. Our Lord would speak to her, even appear to her in kind of very ordinary ways. And they had great dialogue. And in one of these things, these kind of locutions where our Lord speaks to a person, she heard herself addressed by the Lord. And Jesus said to her, "Do not be troubled. My concerns are yours, and your concerns are mine." So she was worried about a lot of things, the foundations of the convents that she was founding, very hard work, a lot of travelling, a lot of opposition and so on. And Jesus comes to reassure her, "Do not be troubled. My concerns are yours, and your concerns are mine." Jesus says the same to you now. Your concerns are mine. He really cares about your concerns. He really listens to what you're saying in your heart, even though he does not grant it immediately, or maybe he doesn't appear to grant it at all, but our Lord is really concerned about these things. Sometimes, I'm sure sometimes we've had even kind of dramatic responses to our prayers. I remember as a little kid going to a raffle, a kind of sale of work with my mum, and buying a ticket for the sale of work, and it was it was the end of the day, and there was all these goodies on the stage. There were microwave ovens, lots of devices for the kitchen, all kinds of electronic goods. But there's one big plastic train, probably pretty worthless, in fact. I was up on the stage, and I remember I'd set my heart on this little train. And the guy who was looking after the evening, he said, "Now for the final event of the evening, in this raffle, whoever wins gets whatever they want on the stage." And I remember praying, "Lord, I want that train." And of course, guess what? I won. I was delighted. I think, in fact, the guy running the raffle was also delighted, because he just got rid of a very cheap little train and went home with all the electronic goods. I cannot remember how my mother felt about it, but maybe, anyway, she seemed to be happy. But there you go, a little prayer. The prayers of children, especially, our Lord hears the prayers of children in a special way. Now, that's kind of unusual, I suppose, that we get our petition answered in such a direct kind of way. But it also does happen. But even if it doesn't, we cannot lose faith that our Lord is concerned about these things. If you pray well, persist at prayer, you will either get what you want or you will get something better. In these 10 minutes with Jesus, there are times of prayer. The preacher, me in this case, we are here to help you pray, but don't leave all the work to us. You have to talk to our Lord. You have to use this. It's only a crutch, really. Use it as an opportunity or as a help, an aid to talking to our Lord, saying things to him in the silence. You don't have to say them out loud, especially if you're with other people in the car, and so it might be a bit funny, but you say things in your heart. Speak to our Lord. You might say, "How do you pray?" And there's a great little point from St. Josemaria in the Way where he answers that question, and it's a wonderful little point. We'll finish up with this. He says, "You write, to pray is to talk with God. But about what? About what? About Him, about yourself, joys, sorrows, successes and failures, noble ambitions, daily worries, weaknesses, and acts of thanksgiving and petitions and love and reparation. In a word, to get to know Him and to get to know yourself." So today we're talking to you, Lord, about prayer. And we tell you sincerely that times we find prayer tough. Even we find it boring at times. And we ask you, help me to pray. Give me what is called in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the gift of prayer. Good to remember that. prayer is a gift. So let us finish this time of prayer asking our Lord, also asking his mother who prayed so well, for the gift of prayer. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections and inspirations you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.